think my intervention's better explained by the model, because I put more time into like modelling and kind of figuring bits and pieces out while I did that.
Did you write your couple of paragraphs?
I did, yeah. I'm trying to speak it from memory so I can try and remember what I say. So when I looked at the challenge of basically making a zero carbon community, the first thing I wanted to assess is kind of where the carbon is coming from at the moment. So in some of my research I did a breakdown of the existing buildings and the kind of things that they're used for. I decided to focus most of my energy on the current residential buildings, because this one in particular is a very old Victorian structure, and it's single glazed, and when I was looking at the energy performance certificate, it was actually said to have no insulation whatsoever, so obviously it performed very poorly, and I summed up the total energy requirements of the whole area. So for example, this building uses 52,000 kilowatt hours of energy a year, which is something like 3 times the amount that a normal sort of 1950s house would be using. So I decided to really rethink how these buildings were going to be used. My project is all about co-housing and sharing housing space as well. So the first thing I wanted to see was whether they were private buildings or not, and who was owning the buildings. And I found these are quite large buildings and they only have typically one family or one private owner per building. So the first thing I wanted to do is to divide up and use the existing space in a more efficient way. So for example, these were currently 4-bedroom houses originally, and I rearranged the space and using these quite tall loft spaces as well to provide 6 bedrooms per house. And also to have the shared kitchen facilities in a sort of co-housing model, so that people would have their own private space in terms of a bedroom and a place where they could study and store equipment, but then they would share things like the kitchen and the appliances and things like that, in the hope that that would reduce the amount of new housing that needed to be built in Oxford, so that they could house more people in the existing structures. So when I started to look at making these structures more energy efficient, the first thing I wanted to do was to reduce the complexity of the thermal envelope. So for example here, there's lots of surfaces and that gives a much larger heat loss area. So what I've done is I've tried to extend and add little bits of space where it would make the building a more simple structure and it would lose less heat in that way. So for my system, I was looking at using an Enefit, a passive house retrofit system, and that basically looks at making a really airtight envelope for all of the existing buildings and adding interior insulation onto the existing structure, and that can lead to 80% less energy use than a new build would be, even though it's an old structure. So for the buildings, they're all mechanically ventilated as well. Which means they get fresh air from the back of the site, where the gardens are, and they basically use this to reduce the overall heating requirement in the building. In the middle, I've designed a core of thermal mass, so basically it can stabilise the temperatures within the building, and I also saw it as a good opportunity to stack all of the services in the centre as well, and I turned the interior of the buildings white because I wanted to make the most of the existing light in the buildings and make sure that they didn't require as much artificial lighting. And in a couple of places I've added different pieces of glazing to get more light in the existing spaces. Obviously this would all have to be triple glazing to meet the passive standard, so it would be to replace all of the existing glazing. For the rear spaces there was lots of sheds and garages, being as we were going for the car-free system last week, I decided to change the use of these to be a community sharing space. So a little bit similar to the concept Katie was talking about, a space where essential appliances and things that people would only use once, stuff for maintenance, they would be able to share together in the centre. And in the rear space that's going to be there, yeah. I haven't had time to finish this little bit, yeah.
Was that an existing building or was that something you built?
So this was, yeah, like an existing garage, and I'm
Okay.
basically taking the structure and sort of refitting the envelope on the inside. For the back we had like separate private gardens, but being as I wanted to turn all the houses into this co-housing model, I wanted to open up all the gardens into like a shared garden space as well, to encourage people to grow food as well. And that's something that they would share in the community resources kind of centre that they have as well, which is where they'd be able to meet to discuss like how the buildings are run and maintained and things like this as well. And like, it's, as you were saying before, it's quite difficult with the sort of maintenance for the mechanical ventilation and for people to know how to learn how to use it. So I thought if there was a sort of shared system where they banded together and they sorted out the maintenance of them, it might be like a little bit easier. And then this structure here is quite fun because mainly I approached it reducing the amount of energy that they would need to consume overall, so there wasn't quite as much energy that they would need to produce. But here I originally looked at a canopy of solar panels, and I wanted to look at the road space because the surface itself wasn't really serving any function, or it wasn't very productive. So I wanted to use the area above to generate some of the electricity demand. And I couldn't model it for this one, but for the heating I wanted to use geothermal heat, just to provide a sort of reliable year-round source of energy, and the fact that it was like a more high density co-housing meant that it could have a more efficient system that's just shared between all of the buildings. Yeah, I think.
Can you talk me through the bit that's on Liffey Road again? Sorry, I
This bit here?
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's basically, the idea is it's going to have like photovoltaic cells on it.
Okay.
But originally I was just looking at a flat structure, but I just wanted, if I was going to add lots of solar panels, I just wanted to add something a little bit sculptural that might add something to the road rather than just like plug in some panels. And because it's got all the different creases, like as the sun moves around as well, like it should be able to get more energy reliably at different times of the day, and like the demand might be a little bit more balanced, because the way the model is tilted at the moment, like this is actually north, like this way, so the sun is going to come like at this kind of angle.
Did you do anything with this building?
I left the school
Okay,
for
that's
now.
fine.
Yeah, I think that I would do the similar thing,
Yeah.
like energy system with it, but obviously time constraints.
Yeah.
It's part of the college, I think.
Oh yeah, I'm actually not sure. I thought, is it the school, modern school?
Yeah, I
Part
think.
of that?
Yeah. I don't should know, right?
And what is the species of that tree?
That's a good question.
You weren't here. I told everyone else I was going to ask them that question. If I saw
Yeah.
a tree on their model.
I'll learn some more species for next week. Yeah. Yeah, of course. Yeah. It's like a food garden, so it makes sense. Yeah.
Oh, stop filming.
Yeah, I think so.
Thanks.